Do this right now. Stand up. Let your arms fall completely loose at your sides. Unlock your knees. Don't straighten them, don't bend them, just release them. Now shake your hands like you're trying to flick water off your fingertips, bounce your heels. Let it travel up through your calves, your thighs, your hips. Keep going. 10 seconds. Feel that? A faint heat crawling across your skin. A tingling at the edges of your fingers. Something in your chest that feels slightly less tight than it did 30 seconds ago. That wasn't random. That wasn't nervous energy. That was a system activating. And most people have no idea it exists inside them. Here is what just happened inside your body. Your muscles contain sensors. Not the kind that detect pain or temperature, a different kind entirely. Proprioceptors, mechanoreceptors, Golgi tendon organs. They are position sensors, motion detectors, vibration readers embedded inside every tendon, every joint capsule, every square centimeter of connective tissue in your body. When you shook your hands just now, you fired millions of them simultaneously. That signal travels up your spinal cord not as a whisper, as a flood. And the spinal cord has a gate. There is a structure in your nervous system called the dorsal horn, a relay station in your spine that decides which signals get priority access to the brain. Mechanical input from motion and vibration travels on the largest, fastest nerve fibers your body has. Beta fibers, myelinated, rapid. Anxiety signals, pain signals, the slow chemical burn of cortisol and adrenaline. Those travel on smaller, slower fibers. When you flood the gate with high-volume kinetic input, the mechanical signal physically crowds out the stress signal. This is not metaphor. This is gate control theory, described in neuroscience literature since 1965, and your body has been running this program since long before you were born. Now here is the part that should stop you cold. Every wild mammal on Earth knows this. Watch footage of a gazelle that has just escaped a cheetah. It didn't outrun the cheetah by being faster. It survived by a margin of centimeters. Its heart is running at 200 beats per minute. Its bloodstream is saturated with epinephrine. Its muscles are loaded with a full chemical payload of mortal terror. And then it stops, it stands in the grass, and it shakes, not in fear, not in weakness. Violently, deliberately, for 60 to 90 seconds, legs trembling, flanks quivering, head loose, and then it simply walks away and begins grazing. Calm, regulated, physiologically returned to baseline, as if the chase never happened. Trauma researchers studying animals in the wild noticed this pattern decades ago. The tremoring is not a side effect of the experience. It is the completion of it. It is the nervous system running its own shutdown sequence, burning off the residual adrenaline, signaling the brainstem that the threat has passed, and physically unlocking the muscles from the defensive contraction they had been holding. Wild animals do not get post-traumatic stress disorder. Humans do, and the difference is almost embarrassingly simple. We stopped shaking. Not because our biology changed. The mechanism is still in there. It lives in your brainstem, in the primitive architecture of your nervous system that formed before language, before cognition, before civilization. The psoas muscle, a thick rope of tissue running from your lumbar spine down through your pelvis, is sometimes called the fight-or-flight muscle because it is the first muscle to contract when your body perceives danger and the last one to fully release. It holds the pattern of every stressful event you have not fully discharged. It carries the memory of the argument you sat through without moving, the presentation where you forced yourself to appear calm, the moment of shock where you held your breath and locked your jaw and told your body to be still. And this is where the story turns. We were taught that stillness is the cure for anxiety. Sit down. Breathe slowly. Don't let them see you shake. The cultural instruction is almost universal. When stress arrives, the composed response is to suppress every physical impulse and stay rigidly controlled. Here is what that actually does inside your body. Adrenaline is a fuel molecule. Your adrenal glands released it because your brain predicted you would need to run, fight, or climb. It is a physical substance, circulating in your bloodstream, waiting to be metabolized by muscular contraction. When you force stillness instead of moving, that fuel does not disappear. It continues circulating. The cortisol lingers, the muscle tension remains loaded. The sympathetic nervous system, which triggered the alarm, has received no signal that the emergency is over, because the body never ran, never shook, never discharged the energy it generated. The alarm stays on. This is why you can have a stressful meeting at 9 a.m. and still feel it in your shoulders at midnight. The event is over. The chemistry is not. Now think about your nervous system not as a brain, but as an electrical circuit. When a lightning strike hits a power grid, the surge travels down the lines at extraordinary speed. A surge protector does not think about the lightning. It does not meditate on the voltage. It trips, a physical mechanical response, and it redirects the excess charge into the ground before it can fry the appliances. The ground absorbs it. The system resets. Your muscles are the ground wire. Shaking is not a symptom of being overwhelmed. Shaking is your body's surge protector physically tripping, redirecting thousands of millivolts of trapped survival energy out through kinetic discharge, metabolizing the adrenaline through rapid muscle fiber recruitment, and sending a mechanical signal up the spinal cord that the A-beta fibers deliver to the brainstem before any conscious thought can intervene. You are not losing control when you shake. You are the only one in the room whose circuit breaker is actually working. The brainstem, specifically the reticular activating system, the brain's threat radar, does not speak the language of logic or reassurance. You cannot talk it down. You cannot think your way out of a sympathetic activation, because the brainstem processes sensory data at a lower level than language lives. But it does read one signal with absolute clarity: loose, chaotic, unguarded limb movement. In the threat detection language of the brainstem, a creature with locked, rigid, contracted muscles is a creature that is still in danger. A creature with loose, bouncing, freely moving limbs has survived. The chase is over. Stand down. 60 seconds of deliberate shaking is not exercise. It is not a coping mechanism in the psychological sense. It is a piece of biological code, written into your brainstem over hundreds of millions of years of mammalian evolution, that tells the most primitive part of your survival brain that you made it, that you ran, that you are safe. And the body, receiving that signal through the fastest neural pathways it has, begins its shutdown sequence in real time. The heat in your skin you felt at the beginning of this, that was your capillaries dilating as the sympathetic vasoconstriction released. The tingling at your fingertips, blood returning to the extremities as your body downshifted from combat mode. That slight loosening in your chest, your diaphragm unlocking from the shallow, high-chest breathing pattern of the stress response and dropping back into its full range. You felt a 10-second sample. 60 seconds runs the full program. This is what no one told you about stress. The solution was never in your mind. It was always in your body, waiting for you to stop suppressing the very reflex that was designed to save you. The gazelle does not know what cortisol is. It has no language for what just happened to it, no framework for processing a near-death experience, no therapist to call on Tuesday. What it has is a body that was built by hundreds of millions of years of pressure, the pressure of being caught and the pressure of surviving, and that body carries inside it a piece of engineering so elegant and so complete that the animal simply cannot accumulate trauma the way we do. Watch what happens in those first minutes after the escape. The gazelle is not grazing. It is not calm. Its cardiovascular system is still running the full emergency program. Heart rate elevated, pupils dilated, muscles flooded with the chemistry of absolute survival. Everything that was poured into its body to make that escape possible is still circulating. The job now is not to pretend the event didn't happen. The job is to complete it, so the body takes over. The tremoring begins in the legs first, because that is where the largest muscles are, the ones that did the running, the ones that are still holding the most loaded tension. It moves upward through the flanks, through the spine, into the neck. The animal is not controlling this. It is not deciding to shake. The shaking is a reflex, an ancient automatic involuntary sequence that the nervous system initiates the moment the immediate threat has passed. It is the system running its own cleanup protocol, and when it finishes, 60-90 seconds later, the gazelle walks away. Not trembling, not hypervigilant. Physiologically reset, fully returned to baseline, ready to eat grass in the same field where it nearly died. This is not a quirk of gazelles. Every wild mammal does this. Deer, lions, elephants, wolves. After every high-stakes physical event, the pattern is the same: the tremor, the discharge, the reset. Researchers who study trauma in animals have documented this consistently across species, and the conclusion they kept arriving at was striking. Wild animals do not develop the equivalent of post-traumatic stress disorder. The traumatic activation is completed rather than suppressed, and the nervous system files the event away without leaving the alarm running. Humans have the exact same mechanism. It is in our brainstems, in our spinal cords, in the architecture of our autonomic nervous system, the same evolutionary inheritance, unchanged. A child who falls off a bicycle and cries hard and shakes and is held and allowed to discharge will often stand up 10 minutes later and want to ride again. The tremor completes itself and the nervous system resets. But somewhere between childhood and adulthood, most of us receive a different instruction. Stop crying. Pull yourself together. Don't let them see you shake. The instruction seems reasonable on its surface. Composure reads as strength. Stillness reads as control. We are taught, at school, in workplaces, in every social context that rewards performance, that the correct response to stress is to override every physical impulse and appear unmoved. The person whose hands are visibly trembling during a presentation is told, silently or explicitly, that they are failing. The correct response is to lock the jaw, slow the breath deliberately, hold the body rigid, and push through. And the body complies. It is remarkably good at being overridden. But compliance is not resolution. When you force stillness over a fully activated stress response, the adrenaline that was released for running does not receive the message that the running is done. The cortisol that flooded your bloodstream to sustain the emergency does not get a shutdown signal. The muscles that contracted to protect your vital organs remain partially contracted. The tremor that was beginning to initiate, that faint shaking you felt and suppressed, because the meeting was still happening, because you were on camera, because someone was watching, gets locked back inside the tissue. The autonomic alarm stays on. Not loudly, not dramatically, just on. Running in the background at a low continuous hum like a car engine left idling in a closed garage. The sympathetic nervous system, which is designed to activate briefly and return to rest, instead remains in a state of chronic low-grade vigilance. The body is not in danger. But it never received confirmation of that, so it waits, muscles held slightly tighter than they need to be, breathing slightly shallower than it should be, sleep slightly lighter, digestion slightly slower, immune function slightly suppressed, the body allocating a portion of its resources, always, to a threat that passed weeks or years ago. This is not a psychological problem. This is a physics problem, and the physics lives inside a tissue most people have never heard of. Fascia is the connective tissue that wraps and penetrates every structure in your body, surrounding every muscle fiber, every organ, every nerve, running continuously from your scalp to the soles of your feet in a single uninterrupted web of collagen. It is not passive packaging. It is mechanically active, capable of contracting, transmitting force, and critically, storing tension. When a muscle is chronically contracted, the fascia surrounding it adapts. It thickens. It stiffens. It begins to act less like a flexible sleeve and more like a cast, holding the muscle in its contracted position even when the muscle itself attempts to relax. Think of it as a wet towel that has been wrung tightly and then left to dry in that position. The fibers bind together at the twist. Simply unwinding the grip doesn't immediately release it. The structure has set. You have to move it, agitate it, reintroduce fluidity to break the pattern that dried into place. Every episode of stress that you suppressed rather than discharged left a small deposit in this tissue. The argument where you held your breath. The moment of shock where you gripped the steering wheel and locked your chest. The years of sitting rigid through situations that your body wanted to run from. The fascia holds the physical record of all of it. Not as memory in the psychological sense, but as compressed mechanical tension stored in collagen fibers that have adapted to the shape of your chronic stress. This is why people who have never had a physical injury can carry profound pain in their shoulders, their hips, their jaw, their lower back. The tissue is not damaged. It is loaded. And the loading is chemical and mechanical simultaneously. Stress hormones bind to fascial receptors, causing the tissue to contract and stiffen, while the suppressed tremors that would have mechanically agitated and released the fascia never arrived to complete the job. The solution is kinetic. The tissue needs movement. Not slow, controlled, careful movement, but rapid, chaotic, high-frequency movement that agitates the fascial web from multiple directions at once and begins to break the compression that has set in over months or years. Which brings us back to the physics of what shaking actually does inside your nervous system. Your body contains two types of stress signals traveling simultaneously. The slow signals, pain, anxiety, the chemical creep of cortisol, travel on small, unmyelinated nerve fibers. They are important, but they are not fast. The fast signals, vibration, pressure, joint position, movement, travel on large, heavily myelinated A-beta fibers that conduct at speeds up to 70 meters per second. When both types of signal attempt to pass through the same relay station in the dorsal horn of your spinal cord, the gait does not treat them equally. High volume, high-speed mechanical input from the large fibers physically competes with and suppresses the transmission of the slower stress signals. This is gait control theory, and your body has been running it since before you were born. When you shake your body vigorously, you are not gently stimulating a few nerve endings. You are firing millions of mechanoreceptors simultaneously. The Ruffini endings in your joint capsules detecting stretch, the Pacinian corpuscles in your deep tissues detecting vibration, the Golgi tendon organs monitoring the rapid load cycling through your tendons, the muscle spindles tracking the constant change in muscle length. The spinal gate receives this signal as an overwhelming flood of non-threatening kinetic data and responds accordingly. The anxiety signal gets crowded out, not suppressed by willpower, physically outcompeted by volume. And simultaneously in the muscle tissue itself, something metabolic is happening. Adrenaline, epinephrine, is not just a feeling, it is a molecule. A real physical substance synthesized in your adrenal glands and released into your bloodstream to prepare your body for extreme physical output. Its job is to make you capable of running or fighting at maximum capacity. It does this by increasing heart rate, dilating the airways, shunting blood to the large muscles, and flooding those muscles with glucose for immediate energy. The molecule is designed to be burned. When you run from the threat, the muscular contraction of running metabolizes the epinephrine. The fuel is consumed, the molecule breaks down, the bloodstream clears. But when you sit still through a stress response, when the alarm fires and the adrenaline releases, and you do not move, the molecule stays. It circulates, unmetabolized, continuing to stimulate the cardiovascular system, continuing to keep the muscles primed, continuing to signal urgency to a body that has nowhere to direct the energy. Shaking rapid fires your muscle spindles, the tiny stretch sensors embedded within the muscle fibers themselves, causing rapid repeated cycles of contraction and release throughout the muscle tissue. This is not the slow, sustained contraction of isometric tension. It is high-frequency cycling, and it is exactly the mechanical condition under which the enzymes responsible for breaking down stress hormones operate most efficiently. The adrenaline gets burned. Not slowly, not partially, rapidly and completely, the way it was always designed to be metabolized, through the physical movement that the chemistry was preparing you for all along. The heat you feel when you shake, that is the metabolic byproduct of the fuel burning. The flush in your face, the tingling at your extremities, the warmth spreading across your shoulders, those are the physical signatures of your body clearing the chemistry of a stress response that may have been sitting in your tissue since this morning, or since last year, or longer. 60 seconds, that is all the protocol requires. Not meditation, not breath work, not suppression, not willpower, not talking yourself into feeling calm while your body remains loaded. Just the movement your body was already trying to make, finally allowed to finish. There is one muscle that holds more of this story than any other. You cannot see it from the outside. You cannot feel it directly with your fingers. It sits deep inside your body, running from the lumbar vertebrae of your lower back, through the pelvis, and down to attach at the top of your femur, the thigh bone. It is the psoas, and it is the largest, deepest hip flexor in the human body. Anatomists sometimes call it the fight-or-flight muscle, not as a metaphor, but as a functional description. When your brain perceives threat, the psoas is among the first structures to contract. It pulls the torso forward and the knees upward, the beginning of a running stride, or the beginning of a fetal curl. It is the muscle that physically initiates the survival posture, and it is the muscle that, in chronically stressed bodies, never fully returns to rest. Feel it right now in your own body. Sit for a moment with your awareness at the front of your lower spine, deep inside the bowl of your pelvis. If you have been sitting at a desk for hours, or if you carry chronic stress, there is a tightness there that you may have stopped noticing because it has been present for so long it registered as normal. That is not normal. That is a psoas that received the contraction signal and never received a credible release signal in return. The tremors that begin in the legs during a full shaking discharge are not random. They originate in the large muscles of the thighs and pelvis, the quadriceps, the hamstrings, the hip flexors, and the vibration travels inward and upward directly into the psoas. This is not incidental. The body is targeting its own deepest stress-holding structure with the one input capable of releasing it. High-frequency mechanical oscillation. The pelvic tremors of a genuine neurogenic discharge look slightly odd from the outside, which is precisely why people instinctively suppress them. But that pelvic shaking is the body unlocking the deepest layer of the defensive curl, physically breaking the contraction pattern that has been holding the torso folded forward in unconscious preparation for a threat that is no longer present. When the psoas releases, the lumbar spine extends, the pelvis tilts back toward neutral, the chest opens. Something that feels remarkably like a deep breath arrives without being forced. The body is not performing relaxation. It is structurally returning to a shape that is incompatible with the defensive posture of chronic stress. You cannot hold a survival contraction in a body whose deepest hip flexor has mechanically let go. And as that release travels upward through the core, it reaches a structure that changes everything at the level of the nervous system itself. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body. It originates in the brainstem and travels downward through the neck, through the chest, through the diaphragm, and into the abdomen, innervating the heart, the lungs, the digestive organs, and the gut. It is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest, digestion, recovery, and calm. And critically, it is not a one-way street. Approximately 80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve are afferent, meaning they carry signals upward, from the body to the brain, not the other way around. This is the architecture that makes bottom-up regulation not just possible, but faster and more reliable than top-down approaches. When you shake, the mechanical oscillation travels through the trunk, through the thoracic cavity, and stimulates the sensory branches of the vagus nerve through movement of the organs, the rib cage, and the diaphragm. The vagal afferents carry this mechanical signal directly to the brainstem, specifically to the nucleus tractus solitarius, the primary receiving station for vagal input, and the brainstem reads it as evidence of physical safety. Heart rate variability, the measure of the subtle beat-to-beat variation in your heart rhythm that serves as the most sensitive marker of autonomic state, begins to shift within seconds of sustained rhythmic movement. The sympathetic dominance that has been running the show begins to yield. The parasympathetic system, which has been waiting for permission to activate, starts to come online. This is not a gradual process that unfolds over 20 minutes of meditation. It is a rapid autonomic pivot driven by mechanical input, arriving through the fastest neural pathways available to the body. The vagus nerve is not waiting for you to feel calm before it signals calm. It is responding to what your body is physically doing right now. And right now your body is moving freely, loosely, without the rigid contraction pattern of a threatened animal. So the brainstem begins updating its assessment of the situation, which brings us to the deepest part of the mechanism. The reticular activating system, the RAS, is a network of neurons in the brainstem that functions as the brain's primary threat monitoring radar. It operates below consciousness, processing sensory data continuously and deciding what warrants escalation and what can be stood. It does not read reports. It does not evaluate your thoughts or your intentions or your logical assessment of whether the situation is actually dangerous. It reads the body, and the body speaks in posture and movement. Contracted muscles, locked joints, shallow breath, rigid guarded minimal movement. In the RAS's ancient valence language, this is the signature of an organism that is still in danger. Bracing, cornered, waiting. The radar stays on. The sympathetic activation is maintained. The body holds its defensive configuration because the defensive configuration is the most recent confirmed data the brainstem has. Loose limbs tell a completely different story. When your arms are swinging freely, when your knees are bouncing without bracing, when the movement of your body is chaotic and unguarded in the way that only a safe animal moves, the RAS receives this data and begins its de-escalation sequence. Not because you told it to, because the mechanical evidence is unambiguous. A prey animal mid-escape does not swing its limbs loosely. A threatened creature does not bounce. Free, unguarded, high-frequency movement is the kinetic signature of an organism that is not being hunted, and the brainstem treats it as such. The radar begins to stand down. The alert level drops. The body receives the internal signal it has been waiting for, not from a thought, not from a breath, but from the simple physical fact of moving freely in space. And as the brainstem de-escalates, the vascular system follows. During the stress response, the body makes a ruthless set of circulatory decisions. Blood is shunted toward the large skeletal muscles and away from the periphery, the gut, and the skin. Capillaries in non-essential areas constrict. The lymphatic system, which has no pump of its own and relies entirely on muscular movement and pressure changes to circulate, slows significantly. Metabolic waste products. The cellular debris left behind by rapid energy expenditure, the breakdown products of stress hormones, the inflammatory cytokines triggered by cortisol, begin to accumulate in the tissue. This is partly why the body feels heavy and stiff after sustained stress. It is not entirely psychological. There is a fluid mechanics problem occurring in the tissue itself. Shaking resolves it mechanically. The rapid, rhythmic contraction and release of the muscles acts as a biological pump, compressing and releasing the tissue dozens of times per second, creating pressure gradients that drive lymphatic fluid through the capillary beds and back into circulation. The metabolic waste gets flushed. The inflammatory markers get cleared. The peripheral circulation, which constricted during the stress response, begins to restore as the capillaries receive the mechanical signal that the emergency is over and normal distribution can resume. The warmth you feel spreading to your hands and feet during a full shaking discharge is the literal return of blood to your extremities as the vascular system comes out of crisis mode. The tissue is being rinsed in real time by movement. Now take all of this. The psoas releasing, the vagal pivot, the brainstem standing down, the lymphatic flush, the metabolic clearance, and consider what your body is carrying every single night when you lie down to sleep. Most people do not sleep poorly because their minds are overactive. They sleep poorly because their bodies are still loaded. The sympathetic nervous system is still running its low hum. The cortisol that never fully cleared is suppressing melatonin production. The psoas is still contracted, making it impossible to fully relax the core. The RAS is still scanning, interpreting the residual muscular tension as evidence that the situation has not resolved, maintaining a level of physiological vigilance that prevents the transition into deep, slow-wave sleep. You cannot think your way out of this. A racing mind at bedtime is not the cause of the problem, it is the symptom. The body was never told it was safe, so the brain keeps generating reasons to stay alert. Address the body first and the mind follows. 60 seconds. That is the protocol. Before you lie down, stand up. Let your arms hang completely loose. Unlock your knees. Shake your hands like you're flicking water off your fingertips. Bounce your heels. Let the movement travel up through your calves, your thighs, your hips, your torso. Let it get slightly ridiculous. Let the pelvic movement happen without bracing against it. You are not exercising. You are not performing. You are running the shutdown sequence that your body has been trying to initiate since the last time you suppressed it. The mechanoreceptors flood the spinal gate with kinetic data. The adrenaline metabolizes through the rapid muscle spindle cycling, the psoas, tremors, and releases. The vagal afferents carry the mechanical signal to the brainstem. The RAS reads the free limb movement and begins standing down the radar. The lymphatic system flushes the residual stress chemistry from the tissue. Heart rate variability shifts upward as parasympathetic tone increases. Cortisol clears, melatonin rises. The whole program runs in 60 seconds. Not because you forced calm, not because you convinced yourself that everything is fine, but because you gave your body the one input it has been waiting for since the moment the stress first arrived. The kinetic signal that the threat is over, delivered in the only language the brainstem has ever trusted. Movement, completion, release. You don't need an app for this. You don't need a subscription, a supplement, or a special technique learned over weeks of practice. You need 60 seconds and enough trust in your own biology to stop suppressing the reflex that was built over hundreds of millions of years of evolution, specifically to save you from exactly the kind of accumulated stress that modern life produces every single day. The gazelle already knew this. Now you do too.